Today is Monday, November 10th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. The shutdown may be finally nearing an end. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. Make sure you do that. Helps others find us as well. You can email us right to our inbox, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. That's our email address, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. Hit us up. We'd love to hear from you. Joining me today, CBN's Billy Hallowell. As always, we have a lot to get to on the podcast today. On the focus story, apologist and author Frank Turek was with Charlie Kirk when he was murdered. And Billy, you recently caught up with him, and what he said is resonating.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke for about 30 minutes, went into a lot of different topics, and we'll break down some of his reactions to what's been going on the show today.
All right. Looking forward to the details there coming up in just a moment. Also, on the main thing, the chaos in Nigeria, the targeting of Christians still going on. It's getting some more attention, but still being overlooked by much of the mainstream media. Madison Seals has more on that coming up on the main thing. All right, make sure you subscribe to all of our CBN News podcasts. You can find all of the links to those in the description of this podcast episode. Always have them in there for you to make it handy. Make sure you are checking all of those out. And we're going to head now to the news in 90 seconds. And after 40 days of paralyzing government shutdown, several Senate Democrats broke ranks with their party, joining Republicans to pass a plan that could finally reopen the government. 8 Democrats, including Dick Durbin, Tim Kaine, and John Fetterman, crossed the aisle, ending weeks of stalemate. The move came despite no firm deal on Obamacare subsidies. That was a key demand Democrats had been holding out for. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer criticized the compromise, calling it a betrayal of families facing rising health care costs. Progressives like Bernie Sanders were even harsher, saying caving now, quote, gives Trump a green light towards authoritarianism. The bipartisan plan funds the government through January 30th, 2026, giving Congress time to hammer out full-year spending bills and avoid another massive omnibus. Senate Majority Leader John Thune also promised Democrats a December vote on Obamacare subsidies, but warned the measure is unlikely to pass. The bill still needs House approval before it reaches President Trump's desk. And a 100-year-old D-Day veteran says Britain has gone to rack and ruin, and his blunt assessment is striking a nerve. Alec Penstone, a former Royal Navy sailor from the Isle of Wight, told ITV he fears the sacrifice of his fallen comrades wasn't worth it with what the country has become. Those are just some of today's top headlines. You can check out more stories over at cbnnews.com. And obviously, we will have the latest on the shutdown as it develops and how this deal gets ironed out. And it looks like that's what David Brody said on Navigating Trump 2.0, another podcast here on CBN. He said it last week that this was happening, that this deal was going to be likely ironed out very soon. And it looks like it has been. So we'll keep you updated there. Billy, I wanted to chat with you quickly about this 100-year-old D-Day veteran. We did a video on this on Friday, and that has resonated as well. And just watching his comments, and it was sad to see it because you could tell it wasn't anger or frustration or bitterness. You could tell he was just sort of heartbroken about what he's seeing the country has become. And, you know, we've reported on a lot of these things from the UK that we've seen, including people praying silently outside of something like an abortion clinic and getting arrested for it, for praying silently. That's just insane. And we've seen a lot of that. And there's massive over-immigration problems going on and a lack of assimilation. So you have all of these things happening right now, and it's just sad to see somebody like a D-Day veteran sit there and think, man, they're throwing it away. They're throwing away the freedoms that I and my friends fought and some of my friends died for.
It's actually heartbreaking. And yeah, you can understand after all the things that they saw and witnessed and the horrific death and destruction, the PTSD, to come back and to then decades later watch a country not understand free speech, watch not just that country, but many others around the world erode free speech, religious liberty, you know, doing things that directly contradict all the things. I mean, look, they went and fought against these kinds of things, right? That was the whole point. And so it's, I think it should be eye-opening for us when we see people like this who come forward and they make these statements. I think it should cause all of us to stop and pause and ponder and wonder. And I think a lot of these instances that we see happen in Europe, they are well-intentioned in the minds of the people perpetuating them, but they're dangerous. I thank God that we have a First Amendment here, but even in America, we've had to fight very hard. Joe Kennedy, the football coach, had to go all the way to the Supreme Court to win a basic right that he should have always had.
Yeah, it's stuff that is over in the UK, definitely a little farther ahead than we are, but we're seeing the same sorts of things. And thankfully, so far in courts, the First Amendment has held up pretty well on a lot of these cases. But to your point, we're having to go to court, and people are having to go to court to fight for their right to say things. And that's kind of a base principle in America. It should be a base principle in America. And so it should be concerning to see that a place like the UK, who supposedly had similar rights, is gotten to the place that it's gotten. And so we definitely do not want to take whatever faults we have right now and have it go even further. And so it should be, like you said, eye-opening to everyone involved. And hopefully we can all do our part to maintain people's rights to say things and keep our basic freedoms intact. All right, we're going to go to the focus story now. An apologist and author, Frank Turek, was with Charlie Kirk when he was murdered. He was there at the event, not far away, then rushed in the car with him as well. Ultimately, obviously didn't make it. But how has he made sense of the tragedy here? And he talked about it with you in comments that, like I said, are definitely resonating.
Yeah, this interview has been very interesting because it was about 30 minutes of time that we spent talking. And, Frank has kept a very level head as he's approached all of this. He was there, standing there. He saw Charlie die. He was with him in those moments after as they tried to get him to the hospital to save his life, which, as you said, did not happen. I asked how he made sense of everything that happened in front of his eyes. And he said, I made sense of it by knowing that what happened was evil. And the only way I know that was evil was because I know what is good. And the only reason I know what is good is because there's a standard of good outside myself, and that's God's nature. He said, as soon as we see something evil, we know it's evil. And, he went on to say that an event like this doesn't disprove God. A lot of people get very upset, obviously, when they go through trials or when something like this happens. But he said it may prove there's a devil out there, but it doesn't disprove God, because you wouldn't even know what evil was unless there was a standard of good. And that just, it's so simple, right? This reality of what he's saying, but it's very hard to remember when you're in the midst of dealing with evil or struggles. And so what's so interesting, though, is he said it's actually an argument for God, not an argument against God, because it points back to the existence of evil. So that was sort of the big thing he led the interview with. And it definitely got me thinking, gosh, sometimes these things are evidence of God because they point to that spiritual battle we see in Ephesians 6.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did he respond to those who are making, man, there have been some crazy conspiracy theories and controversial claims. You're probably going to touch here on one of the ones that a conspiracy theory that involved him. It's insane. So how's he responding to that?
He said he didn't even know about that, the whole thing with him adjusting his hat, and everybody was like, look, there's a person, signaling the shooter. And it happened to just be him taking video of Charlie with a hat on, and he was actually on the phone, I believe, with family members FaceTiming at that time at one point too. But he was just there supporting Charlie, which is what he always does. And, he was not signaling a shooter. And so that he was shocked by that. But, when it came to the conspiracy theories, I asked him, I didn't name anybody. I just sort of asked him how he responded. And he specifically spoke about the different themes and theories that people have come out with. But he talked about Candace Owens. He responded to her. He talked about the fact that she was a good friend of Charlie years ago, and that Charlie would never speak ill of anybody privately unless he spoke to that person first and tried to correct them. So he said he never heard anything negative about Candace from Charlie or anything like that. And when he got into some of the theories, he said, it's okay to suggest that maybe this, maybe that, but as soon as you start launching accusations that TP USA betrayed Charlie, that you had a dream, all these different things. He said, that's not evidence. He said, those hurling accusations and claims without evidence are causing dissension among the brothers, which is something the Lord hates. And so he said a lot more, but really just focused in on that dissension with the comments that are being made that is being sowed among some.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking to see all of that play out. But what did he say about Charlie and martyrdom? Because that's been a discussion that's gone around too. I've seen in Christian circles about that particular aspect of it.
He talked about the revival and the spiritual outpourings following Charlie's death that many have spoken about. We've covered a lot of this, just in increases in Bible sales and, interest in, in faith, which that was happening before Charlie, but there was a surge of that after his death. And he said, Charlie's looking down going, well, that was worth it. If we're going to say, Charlie, 100 people would come to faith if you gave yourself as a martyr, he would go, sign me up. And he said, of course, Charlie wouldn't have wanted to leave his wife and children. And he's like, of course, he would have wanted, Frank himself would have wanted a different way. But the fact that this has happened, he thinks Charlie is looking down and saying that was worth it to see so many people start to question faith and come to the Lord. That's a pretty amazing thing. He also spoke about some of the misconceptions, and I think this is important to note. I would love for people to go watch this interview because I asked him, what are the things people are getting wrong about Charlie? Mainly the claim that he was souring on Israel or shifting perspectives. And he very directly responded to that, dismissed it, talked about Catholicism and all those bigger questions that people have had that Candace and others are talking about, he does address in this interview as well.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Like I said, this video is getting millions of views, and this interview that you did, it's a really great interview. And it's sad to see that it had to be addressed, some of these things, because he directly, you kind of brought up some of these conspiracy theories that are going on. And he said, you're probably talking about Candace Owens. And so he dove right into the most controversial claims that are being made. And Candace has certainly made some of those. And like you said, he tackled them head on. And it's just sad to see that is kind of where a lot of the discourse has gone now, that people are immediately going to jump to these theories. And look, anything's possible in these scenarios. And Frank said that. But like Frank said, you've got to look at the evidence. You cannot just say things based on a hunch, based on a feeling, based on, well, this doesn't look right, and therefore everything has to be wrong. No, you actually need to prove what you're saying beyond a reasonable doubt before you can start positing these things. And it's, interesting because Frank, that's what he does on the Christian faith. So that's why he's gotten millions of followers himself, because he's very good at defending the Christian faith based on the evidence. He's an evidentialist. So that part of it's really fun to watch. And so he's using what he does with biblical evidence, and he's applying it here in this situation.
Yeah. And I think that is, in an interview like this, you want to give people a chance to go where they want to go because it is so sensitive, Yeah. And so he really, I didn't name people, I let him go there. And I think that, what he gave us, to your point, was this argument on evidence. He even said Candace could be right about some of these things, but we don't have any evidence. If you have evidence, that's, that, as you said, that is what we're going to follow. So, we'd love to have him back again, and I think we will, and maybe we'll even give people a chance to ask questions when we do. So we'll have more on that in the coming weeks.
Yeah, always great to talk to Frank. Obviously, unfortunate situation here that he was, found himself to be a part of, but important that somebody like him is the one here able to speak about this, because he is able to speak very clearly on these issues, and I think helpfully when, like you said, a lot of people are being divided and there's some divisiveness being sown on this. So appreciate you bringing that to the table today. And if you want to watch that full interview, I'll put the link there in the description of this podcast episode to the full YouTube interview so you can check that out. So appreciate that. And we're going to go to the main thing now. And CEO and founder of Across Nigeria, Brad Brandon, joined Madison Seals to discuss the ongoing Christian genocide in northern Nigeria, how and why it's been overlooked largely by the mainstream media, and the threat of Sharia law within the United States. That conversation is today's main thing.
Brad, can you start by talking about what's happening to Christians in Nigeria right now?
Yeah, really the hotspot right now is northern Nigeria, where 12 of the northern Nigerian states are controlled by Sharia law. And there is a systematic persecution of Christians that's going on there, despite the denials by the Nigerian government and other media outlets. It's happening. I see it happening all the time. It's been happening for over 10 years that we've been working there. Christians are more persecuted in northern Nigeria than anywhere else in the world, and not by slim margins. If you look at around the globe, of all the Christians that were killed for being Christians, 70% of them are killed in northern Nigeria. It's over 50,000 since 2009. That is just the deaths that are occurring, the killings that are happening, not to mention those who are displaced by the violence. There's 3.5 million people in IDP camps, which are internally displaced persons camps. 80% of those camps are Christians that are there. Those are Christians who've had their houses burned, their villages destroyed, all by groups like Boko Haram and ISWA, who operate and control a lot of the areas in the north. And that's where we operate in northern Nigeria, in those areas that are controlled by those groups. There's also a group called the Fulani Muslims, which is more of the violence stems from more of a socioeconomic and ethnic issues. And I look at that as a related issue, but it is separate. So all of that combined is creating an environment of persecution. Many are calling it a genocide. We've been calling it a genocide for a long time, but it's happening. It's a reality, and it's there.
Yeah, and it's hard to believe that that can be going on, and for so many of us here in the U.S. to be completely oblivious to it and not even realize what's happening. That's been the case for quite some time now. I know President Trump just recently released a video on X talking about the United States' responsibility in protecting Christians and standing up against their persecution in Nigeria. So why do you think it has been overlooked for so long, and what has finally gotten people's attention here in the U.S.?
There's a lot of complexities to that. I would say, first of all, is the denial of it happening. Of course, the Nigerian government is denying that it's happening. And like I mentioned, media outlets and others are outright denying that it's going on. And whenever there's a genocide, there's always deniers. You think back to the Holocaust, and there's even people denying the Holocaust ever happened to this day. But it's not just the Holocaust. If you look at the Cambodian genocide, look at the Rwandan genocide, they all had their deniers. And the reason for that, and the cover-up is because genocides have to operate under cover of darkness. It's when that violence that is exposed that people start to realize what's going on and start to take action to stop it. So I think largely it's been denied, and so the media denies it or doesn't cover it or minimizes it. That translates here into the U.S. Our media hasn't covered it. We've been crying from the mountaintops for 10 years that this systematic killing is going on, and the media here in the West has paid very little attention to it. And I think then in turn that translates into people not knowing about it. So if you don't know that something's going on, it's very difficult to do anything about it. So it really is a systematic cover-up of what's happening, and it's been effective for a long time. But as you mentioned recently, the media coverage has greatly increased, and I welcome that. I welcome President Trump's willingness to call attention to this. Other lawmakers, like Congressman Cole and Senator Ted Cruz, are all drawing attention to this, and it's a welcome change. I can tell you, after 10 years of trying to fight this battle, we're just now finally starting to get this story into the media, and that's working its way into the American church. I used to travel around to churches from East Coast to West Coast talking about these issues, and people would have no idea that it's going on. Now I go to churches and people know what's happening. They can identify with it because they've heard the stories. They know what's happening in northern Nigeria. So I think that's really what's been behind all of this for the last 10 years.
Yeah, and like you said, your organization that you founded, called Across Nigeria, has thankfully been providing aid to Christian communities in Nigeria for those 10 years. Can you talk a little bit more about how you've been doing that?
So in northern Nigeria, I already mentioned that the 12 of the northern Nigeria states are controlled by Sharia law. It's an extremely strict form of Sharia law in northern Nigeria. They observe blasphemy laws. Those laws are punishable by death. So what that looks like on the ground is if you're a Muslim and you convert to Christianity, that is a crime punishable by death, meaning that your family can either kill you or they can contract somebody else to hunt you down and kill you. So we go into those areas where people are under imminent threat, and we extract them out of those situations and bring them to our refugee facility. And there's certainly other communities of Christians throughout northern Nigeria. They have a hard time getting food, clean drinking water, medical care, even sending their kids to school because they're Christians. A lot of times Christians can't even go to the market and buy food. And on top of that, this is an area of the world where people live on less than $1 a day, and food isn't any less expensive there. In fact, it may be more expensive with inflation. So you're looking at people who are working all day just to buy food to provide for that day. So they're living day to day and often in survival mode. And then on top of that, oftentimes these communities are being harassed, being threatened, being attacked by groups like Boko Haram and ISWA and other factional terrorist groups. So we'll go into those areas as well and provide medical care. We provide clean drinking water. We'll drill wells for those communities. We'll often bring food or clothing into those areas. And again, if those are in imminent threat, we'll take them out of that situation as well and bring them to our refugee facility. At our refugee facility, we essentially help them restart their life. When they come to us with nothing but the clothes on their back. The government often will seize their property or even freeze their bank accounts. In some cases, even take their children from them. So they come to us with nothing, and we give them a plot of land to grow a garden. We give them blankets and clothing and cooking utensils. We give them a little apartment, a 2-room apartment to stay in. We keep them there for about a year while we disciple them. Many times they're new believers, especially if they come from a Muslim background. So we have a discipleship program and a pastor on staff at our refugee facility. And then we try to relocate them to a safer part of the country and get them plugged into a local church in that area.
That's so great. And I think you sort of answered this at the beginning of this previous question, but I would love to talk about this article that you wrote recently for the Daily Wire, in which you talked about some of the tragic things that you've seen firsthand, and you caution against the rise of Sharia law that basically seeks to wipe out Christians and any other faith. How big of a threat is Sharia law right now in the U.S., and what do you think that people need to understand about it?
The Sharia law is a huge threat globally. If you go back to the early 1980s, there was one country in the entire world that had adopted Sharia law as its legal system. That country was Saudi Arabia. Fast forward to the early 2000s, there were 16 countries, and by now, I think it's around 38 or 39 countries that have officially adopted Sharia law as their legal system. We only have about 196 countries in the world. So to have 38 or 39 of those countries, you can see the spread globally. What we see happening is in places like Europe, go to London or other places in even Norway or Germany or Greece. Those cities, countries often have in their capital cities no-go zones where first responders are not allowed to go into those areas. So you have police officers, paramedics are not allowed to go in those Islamic-controlled neighborhoods or areas. And we see that also happening in the legal system in the UK as well. Under the Arbitration Act that recently was passed in the UK, it calls for Sharia law to be used as precedent in legal decisions that are made. We even see that happening here in the United States, going back as far as 2009 in New Jersey. There was a Superior Court judge who consulted a couple's imam on a legal decision that was made. The woman was accusing her husband of abuse. Because under Sharia law, a woman's testimony is worth half that of a man's, the imam told the judge to rule in favor of the husband. The judge did. So he essentially used a Sharia law or a Sharia decision to make his decision in a U.S. legal court. Now, that case was ultimately overturned, but it just shows the volition of Sharia law, even here in the United States. Again, not to assimilate, but to dominate.
All right, Madison, appreciate that. And that's going to leave us with time on the podcast today for one last thing.
Well, we've got Proverbs 12:22. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who act faithfully are his delight. So we got to watch what's coming out of our mouths. We can't be lying. We got to be telling the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, everyone, we're all fallen sinners here. So every one of us is guilty at some point or another of telling something that's untrue. But we have to hold each other accountable, and we have to value the truth because we see it in Scripture. Truth matters. So that's where we're going to leave it on this edition of the Quick Start Podcast. As always, make sure you get on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. We appreciate you stopping by and visiting us, and we think it'll be a blessing to you as well. Lord willing, and that creek don't rise up on us. We'll be back tomorrow with more. God bless. We'll see you then.